And calling all Swifties, are you ready for this? It is a Taylor Swift concert weekend here in Singapore, and she's set to make the whole economy a shimmer. The expected boost is no fairy tale, though. The Eras tour in the US was at one point blamed by some economists for an uptick in inflation. Now, recent research estimates that the tour generated a $5 billion economic boost to the US, bigger than the whole economy of Timor-Leste. Ticket sales alone brought in $1 billion last year, and each concert goer spent an average of $1,300 helping businesses near concert venues. Now, here in the Asia Pacific, the blockbuster tour is only happening in Japan, Australia, and Singapore. And the phenomenon now known as Swiftonomics is apparent. One estimate pegs the economic value of Swift's concerts in Melbourne at nearly $790 million. Another research says her 4 shows in Tokyo may have brought in close to $230 million. Now it's Singapore's turn. Demand for hotels and flights have surged, and travel-related services are ready to cater to Swifties from across Southeast Asia. Hopes are high that Swift's concert starting tomorrow would solidify Singapore's reputation as an entertainment venue, bringing in an economic boost that never goes out of style. And David Mann, Chief Economist at Asia Pacific at Mastercard, joins us for more to talk all things Taylor Swift today. Yeah. A bit different from our regular business chats. But I think I want to ask you first is this estimate of how much, Swift's tours could bring in for Singapore. I mean, we've seen those stellar figures for Australia and Japan as well. So there are some pretty high hopes for Singapore.
Well, that's absolutely right. In the study that we did looking at the impact on the tours as she went around the US, we believe that there's a fair expectation that you should be seeing around 60 to 70% uplift in the bars and restaurant spending figures around the times of the concerts, at least in the areas that are convenient enough for then getting to the venue. And in the case of Singapore, there's plenty of places very convenient for that. Also, we should be expecting the accommodation side, which in the case of the US was up around 30% in the cities where had that events taking place. Something like that should also be happening in Singapore because we know there'll be even more of the international travelers coming in. And then in addition to that, the extra spending, it's really, even though we know the cost of living has gone up, actually a lot of consumers have found ways to shake it off with experiences. And that's what we've been seeing exactly all around the US. And we think the same thing is going on here. It was going on in Australia. Same thing for Singapore too.
Yes, travel, the hotel accommodation, those are like pretty big, boosts. But there are some other boosts to the economy. Right. Little shops that we've seen in Singapore that, sell materials to make one of these like iconic friendship bracelets. These have also getting a boost in the last couple of months, in fact.
Right.
So where else do you expect to see spending in, and what other sort of benefits could Swift's tour generate for Singapore?
Well, there is that feel-good factor. There is that I really want to make sure I've got everything with me for the concert, even including, say, these sort of bracelets, as you mentioned. If people... Oh, would you like this one?
Okay, wait. I actually have one here. I know this is like a big part of the concert, right? Where you have to exchange handmade friendship bands.
Let's do one now then. Here we go.
So many. I definitely want one from you.
Thank you very much.
Yes. So talk to us more about how these very cute friendship bracelets help the economy as well.
Well, the thing is that even with something like this, you want to go and find them. There's plenty of places suddenly offering them, knowing these opportunities are there for the tourists coming in. And then, of course, there's plenty other things in the stores. You get the foot traffic, you get even more likelihood that other things are being purchased, a bit of retail therapy happening at the same time around department stores, all other places. The other thing that we could get, separate to, say, apparel or these sort of merch spending, is also when people come in, they may choose to spend a bit more time and go to some of the other sort of attractions that are there. And in the case of Singapore, it could be the zoo, could be down in Sentosa. There's a lot of other options you could have. And of course, going to the bars and restaurants, all of those parts of experiences, and then the in-person retail, getting that feel-good factor going, even with things like this, right ahead of the concert.
Yeah, so definitely some spillover effects that, other businesses can enjoy. But help us understand, the scale and impact of this Swift lift. So it's not the only mega event that Singapore has seen. We have F1
right.
And a whole lot of other big events that are big crowd pullers as well. So how does Taylor Swift's concert and even Coldplay, the 6 shows that they did, how does it fare when compared to these other mega events in Singapore?
Well, they all matter, and certainly the cross-border tourism spending numbers are all clearly much higher. You do get a different makeup of the tourists. So, for example, more usually during the year, you could see, say, Indonesian cross-border spending or, say, Malaysia cross-border spending being relatively stronger. But during these events, you could get tourists coming in from other markets. For example, the F1 would have been more from, say, the UK or from Australia and even from Hong Kong, as we believe is going on this year as well. So you will get a change in the mix. The difference, I think, also, though, is that for these concerts, they're not quite as disruptive. Say with the F1, you do also get some disruption effects that pushes some spending maybe to later, or maybe even, say, folks in Singapore travel at that time outbound because they know that there could be a bit more of the disruptions. In the case of these concerts, it's more of people coming in. You're not getting as much of the disruption. It's a very smooth traveling experience anyway, transport all around the city. Yeah. And actually, in that way, you could argue it's just as good, if not better.
Yeah, and then the question is, how much also of a lift do you think the Taylor Swift effect can give the Singapore GDP, and also whether it's enough to create sort of an upside risk to inflation?
Well, a lot of this really comes down to how long-lasting this sort of feel-good factor can be. Certainly during the event, no question, you get that marginal extra positive on GDP, marginal extra lift on, say, accommodations cost and food costs and things like that. But is it for a lasting impact? That's really the other key factor here. Do you get even more of spending? I would argue that it comes from putting Singapore more on the map, for example, getting even more tourists coming in because they've seen it and see all these other things that you can be doing, repeat visitors. That persistent side is where it's a harder question to answer, but certainly having these events and the sort of publicity that something like a global phenomenon like this one is having clearly would be adding to the upside risk that come from that sort of perspective.
Yeah, and finally, do you think we could see more of such mega concerts, stretching, of course, first thing, big acts, and of course, stretching more than, like, say, 6 shows?
It's possible. I think there was already a relative surprise. Take, for example, with Coldplay, new shows got added. And I think you could see some more of this, but there is an element of just how many are there of these sorts of acts that would attract that sort of volume of folks, including coming in from outside. I would not want to move on from this without mentioning, though, that even with all of these challenges that many consumers face, there has been an accumulation of excess savings ever since the COVID pandemic. The preference towards experiences is very strong, and therefore there may be some pleasant surprises of just how many more you could actually add without saturating the market.
All right, David, appreciate your time coming in to talk about Taylor Swift.
Thank you.
Thank you for this bracelet.
Pleasure.
David Mann there, a chief economist at Asia Pacific at MasterCard.